Chapter 5, 1980 to 1982. The ending of our sailing dream brought about not only disappointment for Andy and me, but threw Andy into depression. I couldn't have known at the time that my beloved husband would have several stress-related and debilitating illnesses during our life together. I could see plainly only that what was presently happening with the boat was not acceptable, natural, or healthy for him or me. We couldn't afford to keep paying for it, and our partners were not helping. After we sold our sailboat and Andy had recovered, we worked to save enough money for a 6-week trip to French Polynesia, which was the first place we had planned to sail our boat. We had read a lot about these islands and hoped to meet local people and learn about their culture and lives. When we were at our hotel in Maupiti, the owner suggested we go to the island of Maupiti. There were no hotels there, but he had friends who he thought would be interested in hosting us. He wrote his name and a message on his hotel brochure and gave it to us as an introduction. Flying to the island of Maupiti gave us a bird's-eye view of this tiny island. There were 4 miles of dirt road that circled its perimeter. We walked all the way to one end of the island and then back again to a small line of homes until we came across some kids playing in the road. We asked about the people whose name we had on the brochure and were pointed toward a blue house standing right at the edge of the sea. We knocked on a door and a couple escorted us inside and settled us onto a couch in the living room. As we chatted with them and explained that we were looking for a family to live with for a month, we were given water to drink with lime juice squeezed from the right tree right outside the door. A small child dragged our backpacks into a side room, and we were told we could stay as long as we wanted to. Our host couple was young. Solange was 21 and pregnant with their 4th child, and Andre was 24. Children flourished on Maupiti and were watched over in a loving, communal way. I was 24 at that time and thought that if I lived there, I'd probably have a bunch of kids too. It seemed so easy, and I knew we wanted to be parents one day. People on Maupiti earned money from growing watermelons on the motus, or the flat islands that formed the lagoon around Maupiti. We visited the motus in Andre's outrigger boat and found beautiful seashells in addition to tasty watermelons. Every day we joined our host family for their daily big meal that happened around noon. Our first meals consisted of canned mackerel and plates full of white rice. After a few days of this fare, we got up our courage to ask if they would be willing to share some of their more traditional local food. Of course, we were told. We thought this was what Americans would prefer. Not us, Andy said. We want to experience how you live. After that, we went out spearfishing in the lagoon with Andre. From then on, we dined on fresh fish and mashed manioc root with fresh grated coconut and coconut milk poured all over it. In addition to being an adept fisherman, Andre was a student of Kung Fu. His master teacher lived in the U.S. "Someday I hope to visit my teacher who lives in your country," he told us. "Where does he live?" we asked, picturing a David Carradine-type man in California or Florida. "Her home city is a Tahitian word," he told us. "She lives in Omaha." "Omaha!" we exclaimed. "Is it very beautiful there?" Andre asked us as we sat under a lime tree on a mountainous green island in French Polynesia, with the famous turquoise water glimmering and watermelon-filled motus surrounding us. Andy and I looked at each other, wondering how in the world to answer the question. Finally, I answered, "It is not beautiful like it is here, but I think you would find it beautiful because your respected and loved teacher is there." Once we left Maupiti, we spent some weeks on the island of Raiatea. On our first day there, we went to see the mayor to ask about a possible host family, and he told us, "Go to the Bali High Hotel." We knew we couldn't afford to stay there, so we left his office and began walking out of town on a dirt road. I was feeling a little uneasy as dusk approached. We had landed on the island with nowhere to stay. Suddenly, a voice shouted in a clipped accent, "Hi!" We looked around and saw a young man with giant hibiscus flowers behind both ears and a smile as bright as those flowers. "Hi," we called back. "American?" he asked in the strange Tahitian French accent we were becoming familiar with. "Yes," we said, smiling back. He came over and we noticed he had pollen on both cheeks from the stamen of the flowers he was wearing. We felt an immediate kinship because he seemed about our age. "Where do you stay here?" he asked us. "We don't know yet," Andy answered, and then told him we had seen the mayor and he was not helpful. Our new acquaintance offered an immediate solution for us. "I will take you to La Piscine and you can stay there." Our ability to trust life, even as things were uncertain, became a valuable resource for us later. We learned that what we needed to have usually did show up, even if we had to wait for it. La Piscine turned out to be a very simple place to stay, exactly what we were looking for. There were about 10 rooms with a large shared bathroom in a one-story building which sat on a peninsula that jutted out into a lagoon. There was a separate, spatial, communal outdoor room with a thatched roof and a floor completely covered in mats where we did yoga, as well as a wooden deck built over the lagoon. It cost $6 per night. I went for runs along the road in the morning before it got too hot, and we'd often walk or take a bus to town to pick up fruit and salad at the covered markets. From our room, we had a clear view of the island of Bora Bora. Each evening we'd eat dinner while watching the silhouette of the island blend into the night as dark settled and the unfamiliar southern hemisphere stars became visible. Each night we lost ourselves in those stars as we fell asleep. Our funds were getting low and our 6 weeks were almost over, so we booked an overnight passage back to Papeete on a boat. It was a hard night on a hard deck where we lay with families and other travelers. In Papeete we did yoga in a park, ate some food, and slept at the airport on some grass outside. Early in the dawn we caught our flight home. The loss of our boat Talofiafaoi still stung, but exploring French Polynesia had changed us. The simplicity of island life had rubbed off on us, and we were inspired to live adventurous lives as artists and travelers even without our boat. We felt more ready to approach our next steps. Jackson Hole, Aspen, and art show traveling, 1981. Andy and I returned from Tahiti and moved our camper to Jackson Hole, Wyoming for the winter. We settled back into our pattern of skiing somewhere for the winter season and traveling all over the country to sell our work in art shows in the spring. Previously, we had lived in Telluride, Colorado. We were on a mission to try out places other than Aspen to live and ski. We stayed in the parking lot at Teton Village in our newly customized camper. Andy had taken all the metal off the outside and re-insulated it so we'd be cozy in the winter. He built lockable boxes on the outsides for our skis and installed a 12-volt music system. I baked bread every week in our tiny kitchen, and every day we'd go skiing. Andy was running into problems with his knees and feet hurting, and it turned out that he wasn't able to ski as often as he would have liked. These early days of Andy's physical body not cooperating with our hopes and plans set the tone for how we handled that experience later. We learned not to jump into a remedy too fast, but to let his injury or sickness play out a bit until we were pretty certain the remedy was the right one. We returned to Aspen before the ski season was over, partly because of Andy's knee and feet problems. We had more connections there, and we could ask for help and advice. Returning to Aspen had become a ritual by now, and each time it felt more and more like we were returning home. We moved back to Aspen Highlands ski area, joining the early morning ski patrol snowpackers living out of the parking lot. We'd go up the lift at 8 a.m. and worked for our lift tickets until about 10:30, and then we'd ski for the rest of the day. Most of the guys on the patrol were our friends already, and we loved the feeling of being back where we felt most at home. Andy and I skied in Aspen the first 2 years we knew each other, and after that had tried to work doing jobs we thought might lead into longer-term careers. Andy worked for his dad installing interior shutters, and I tried modeling in San Francisco in 1975-76. Andy then worked as a trader at the Chicago Board of Options Exchange in Chicago in 1978. All our attempts to find work turned out to be disastrous financially for us. Initially, making bronze jewelry was only supposed to be for a summer job, but it turned out to be time after time what saved us when our attempts for careers ended in failure. Discovering that making sales at art shows was a way to earn a good living seemed fateful and fortuitous. We jumped into that line of work with both feet and found that we not only loved the work and travel, but the more that we did it, the more profitable it became. One day I received a phone call from Andy, and he said, "I don't think we have to worry about money anymore." He called me from Midland, Texas, after we had split to do several shows in one weekend. People in Texas loved our jewelry, and there were a lot of art shows there, so we had found our market. During the winter when we weren't skiing, we would apply to about 100 juried art shows in order to be accepted into 25 or 30 for the year. It was competitive. We made jewelry while we traveled by setting up shop in various state parks. It was always a challenge to make a sensible travel plan since shows were located nationwide, and it was not possible to know which shows we'd be accepted to before hearing from the jury. We spent weekends selling our work at the art shows where we'd been accepted in, and we'd spent the weekdays making jewelry, going for runs, and living a simple and rich life close to nature. We tended to migrate south in the fall, spending some time each October and November in Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, selling our work. We never knew how much money we'd earn, so we often had difficulty making plans for the far future. Later, this spontaneous lifestyle became a lifesaver. Our passion for skiing had allowed us to collect a large group of friends over many years, and we were discovering that art show people were just as wildly interesting, diverse, honest, and creative as our ski friends. We were part of two distinct communities, and both were cool. Our ski friends taught us about the independence and freedom of camper living. They were an eclectic group. Some were on the ski patrol, and others dodged the ski patrol. One was even a Paralympic ski pioneer. We were all united in our passion for skiing every day. We felt in sync with our art show friends because we shared a passion for handmade things. We were artisans, craftspeople, and fine artists connected by our belief that we could earn money selling what we could make ourselves. We had a common mission to share our work with the world through art shows. At that time of my life, I was waking up to the idea that not all ways of making and handling money were ethical. Andy and I decided to tithe 10% of our gross sales from every art show to various people and organizations we believed in and wanted to help. This decision connected us more broadly to the world and allowed us to participate, albeit in a small way, to making the world a better place. We understood even then that in choosing to make and sell bronze jewelry, we were not likely going to realize extreme wealth, but we thought we might just end up extremely happy anyway, and to us that was a worthy outcome. We had saved some money and decided it was time to shake things up again. "Let's move to Hawaii," Andy suggested. "We could train and enter the Honolulu Marathon and still get back for art show season." "I have a high school friend who lives in Hawaii," I said. I contacted Pamela, who lived on the Big Island in Hilo, with her 4-year-old. She had married very young, gotten pregnant, and then quickly divorced. She was raising her son on her own, but she shared a big house with a friend. There happened to be a room for rent for the month of August, and we accepted her offer. The Big Island, Hawaii, 1981. I have never forgotten the lush scents and seductive air that hit us upon our first steps out of the airport in Hilo. It smelled like we were bathing in flowers. Pamela greeted us with plumeria, ginger, and jasmine leis, and we bundled our stuff and ourselves into her little red Chevette. Our home for the month was in a residential neighborhood, and we were very comfortable in the room where we stayed. As Pamela juggled her life as a mother, waitress, and college student, she made time to take us on some sightseeing adventures. She initiated us into the spiritual aspects of this wild place. We visited steaming natural pools, gigantic lava tubes, and black sand beaches. We sat under ancient banyans and ate ripe fruits. We spent the beginning of our stay in Hawaii looking for a house in a neighborhood where we would want to live and train, but so far hadn't found it. We had run out of the time Pamela had set aside to tour us around, and we learned her car needed some repairs. We wanted to see what it was like farther west, and Andy had the idea that we could pay to repair her car in exchange for using it to go check out the other side of the island. We drove the northern route through Waimea, also called Kamuela. The road down to the sea was 15 miles of curves. The Pacific Ocean was in distant view as we descended. The starkness of the black lava rock landscape bordering the bright sea was startling. We were headed to an area Andy had seen on the map called Puako, but on the way we took a detour to Hapuna Beach State Park. Standing at the top of the walkway that led to the beach, Andy noticed the waves. "Looks like we could body surf here if we wanted to," he observed. We drove up a hill back to the highway and then drove south for a couple miles until we saw the sign for Puako. We turned right and cruised down another hill for about a mile until the road flattened into a residential street. The houses on one side were all oceanfront. We noticed green grass, bright flowers were the landscaping choice for both larger homes and small fishing shacks. There weren't any mansions. All the homes seemed modest and simple. After driving a couple miles, we came to the end where there was a turnaround for cars. As we were turning, Andy said, "I sure could live here. I wonder how we'd find out if there was anything to rent." We continued driving slowly with our windows rolled down when we saw a woman hitchhiking. She seemed a bit older than us. She was wearing a piece of tie-dyed cloth as a dress of sorts and had short curly hair. We stopped and she got in our car. "I'm Lee," she said. "Where are you heading?" "We're exploring this side of the island," I informed her. "We're going south, but we don't have a destination. We were just checking out Puako as a possible place to live and train." "Train for what?" she asked. "We're runners and want to train for the Honolulu Marathon," I told her. "There's an event close by in Kona called the Ironman Triathlon," she said. "The entrants swim, bike, and run, and the bike course is right on this road." I noticed a gleam in Andy's eyes. We had read about this race. A group of crazies had started it on the island of Oahu. It was an extreme distance race involving a 2.4-mile ocean swim, a 112-mile bicycle race, and a marathon distance run at the end. "The race moved to this island this year, and it takes place in February. There's a lot going on here besides that. If you aren't on a tight schedule right now and want to have an adventure, I'm going to a sacred spot. If you drive me there, I'll share it with you." How could we resist? This go-with-the-flow lifestyle had become so natural for us. We turned off the highway again, and at Lee's direction headed toward the City of Refuge. This was a historical park with houses recreated from the time of Hawaiian kings. Legend had it if a criminal could reach the City of Refuge, they would be pardoned of their crime and allowed back into society. It was a lovely spot, but Lee headed right past it. We followed her along a rocky path that bordered the sea and then threaded its way up into the lava rock hills. Eventually, we came to a cave-like opening. "Come into the lava tube as far as you can," Lee said. She went in and disappeared around a corner. Andy and I went in holding hands, but soon found we needed both our hands to keep from knocking our heads into the rough walls as the tube became smaller. We crouched and kept moving forward into a darker and darker space. As we moved into total blackness, I had a moment of extreme fear. We couldn't see anything in any direction and had to choose to continue or turn around as the walls got even closer. We were touching each other because the small space and utter blackness gave us no choice. On hands and knees, we continued a few more steps until a light burst forth in front of us, and we literally saw the light at the end of the tunnel. It turned out to be a hole that opened up to about a 40-foot drop directly into the sea. We made our way to it like pilgrims on a quest. "If you would be so kind to take my clothes, I am going to jump here and will meet you back at the beach," Lee said. I watched in awe as Lee stripped and jumped into the waiting arms of Mama Ocean. Andy and I watched her start swimming before we made our way back through the tube to the path. Being there felt dreamlike. We found Lee waiting for us naked behind a tree and gave her clothes to her. It was mid-afternoon by then, and Lee invited us to have dinner and spend the night at her house in Puako. In the morning, Lee told us that her renter was moving out. The rent was affordable. We liked Lee, and the house and location were ideal for us to live and train. "The only problem is that we are leaving the island in a couple days and want to move here in October," Andy told her. It was at the end of August. "My renter is not moving out until October," Lee said. "How convenient." We left a cash deposit and drove Pamela's car back to Hilo in a state of wonder because we had found our place. We had met a woman who was friendly and had shared with us a day we would never forget. It was time to leave the big island, but I had a happy heart knowing we would return in a month. We flew back to the mainland and drove our camper to Louisiana for an art show. We were set up next to our friend Lucy, who made stuffed toys and puppets. I noticed that she was now making blankets out of the same soft plush fabric as she made her toys. "I like your new blankets," I told her. "Do you?" she responded. "Well, I've been making toys so long, and it seemed time to branch out. Besides, I learned people always like to see new work." "How long have you been selling at art shows?" I asked her. "Well, honey, just about my whole life. I love it, and I can't imagine why I'd stop. There's something about setting up and sitting in the street selling your work that keeps you honest and humble. It's a good life." Honest and humble. It's a good life. That was our last show before moving to Hawaii. As we packed our belongings, my friend's words kept floating through my mind, and I realized I was creating a life I loved. Puako, 1981 and 82. "I keep thinking about that Ironman triathlon," Andy told me. "Really?" I said. "You don't think running a marathon is enough of a challenge?" "It just seems like such a crazy cool thing to be part of," Andy countered, "and we're going to live right on the race course." "I don't know if I'd be strong enough to swim 2.4 miles and then ride 112 miles and then run a marathon," I replied. "Michelle, we're going to train for 4 months. We'll both be strong enough." Andy had never run a marathon, but was much more experienced at training and competing in track and cross-country races. I had run a couple of marathons before and knew how exhausted I felt at the end. I wasn't a competitive person by nature. "We don't care what our times will be, right?" I asked. "We'd only be doing it to finish." I couldn't really grasp the reality of doing it, but I could imagine having finished the thing and forever after knowing we had accomplished the major feat. I liked the idea of that, so I agreed. "Well," Andy said, "I'd want to do it in the fastest time possible for me." "Okay, Andy, I'll train with you for the Ironman triathlon and hope for the best." We flew over to Hawaii with our bicycles, swim goggles, and running shoes, and got ourselves to Lee's house in Puako. Everything was just as we agreed. We moved into our room in the little beach house. We bought a big old blue Chevy sedan for $100, hoping it would take us up and down the 15-mile hill to Waimea for groceries once a week. We also bought a 16-foot Hobie catamaran on a trailer, even though our new car couldn't pull it. We had the idea of hitchhiking with our sailboat and hoping a vehicle with a hitch would stop and pick us up. This ended up happening numerous times and is a good illustration of our youthful belief in things always working out. Our training began in earnest. Andy had a schedule, and we followed it exactly. We trained every single day, and his plan built us up to running 2 miles 3 times a week, 10 miles 3 times a week, and over 15 miles once a week. We swam between 1/3 of a mile and 1 mile every day in the ocean, and rode our bicycles between 20 and 60 miles every day. We'd awaken early in the morning around 4:30 a.m. and do some yoga and wash up for that day. We'd eat a banana or 2 each and head out running in the dark. We'd wear our bathing suits under our running clothes and found we could tuck our swim goggles into our elastic waistbands. We warmed up by running in the dark through Puako for a couple miles, and as we arrived at the hilly, potholed back road that led to Hapuna Beach, we'd increase speed. The sun would be coming up over the mountains. We'd pass the beach and continue to the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel golf course, where after drinking our fill from a water fountain, we'd run up and over the golf course grass to another road that took us all the way to Kauai Beach Park. There we'd turn around and run back to Hapuna Beach. By 7 in the morning, we had already run 10 miles. After running, we would swim out just past the break and do laps from end to end of the Crescent Bay, parallel to the beach. While swimming, we couldn't hear anything, and our goggles gave us the view of the ever-changing patterns the waves made in the sand. We saw fish, both brightly colored and camouflaged. We'd witness the sun hitting us in the water and not only see the bright beauty of that, but feel the warmth. It was always cold coming out of the sea into the morning air. Andy found one cement slab at the far end of the beach that absorbed the sun's warmth. Every day we lay our shivering bodies on this hot surface and rest as the warmth settled us. By the time we'd walked the 3 miles home, we were so hungry that we would immediately make fresh banana and papaya smoothies and pour them over a gigantic bowl of organic raw oats. After the oats had soaked a bit, we'd eat while sitting in chairs looking at the sea. Often we'd see humpback whales and dolphins. We rarely talked because it took all our energy to chew. Our routine was a success and gave us the template for future routines for healing when Andy was sick. After our bike training in the afternoon, we'd cook up a big pot of brown rice and a bunch of island vegetables like carrots, green beans, eggplant, and purple sweet potatoes. We had to go to sleep pretty early because 4:30 a.m. came around quickly if bedtime was too late. We continued this training schedule all of October, November, and December. Another person, Bobby Martin, was a runner we'd met training. He had a lot of money, likely gotten in unscrupulous ways, but we became friends anyway. He moved next door to us and offered to be our transport to and from the Ironman race. Kona was buzzing with Ironman triathlon energy. Our sleepy little town grew into tourist central, and athletes dominated the view in their Speedos, bright bike shirts, and skimpy running outfits. Race day came. Bobby drove us to Kona the day before, and we set up our bikes in the designated area on the pier along with hundreds of other contestants' bikes. Our water bottles were full, and we had medjool dates and bananas in our bike bags because they were the foods we'd gotten used to eating while training. We had also practiced fixing flat tires on our bikes because the rules didn't allow anyone else to help if a flat occurred. As the starting time approached, Andy and I placed ourselves toward the back of the crowd. We knew we weren't going to win, and we didn't want to get injured in the starting rush. There were only 10 minutes left before the start when a voice came over a loudspeaker booming, "Andy Heath, contestant Andy Heath, your bicycle has a flat tire. You could change it now if you want to." Andy looked at me in shock. "Good thing we practiced changing flats so much. If I'm not back before the start, good luck, and I'll see you on the bike course." He loped off to fix his flat and came running back just as the gun went off and the race began. Being flexible as circumstances arose was becoming second nature. I remember the swim being fun and not as hard as I thought it would be. It was wonderful to be with so many people in the water, and there were small boats that helped keep us on course. After swimming alone or only with Andy, this felt like a party. I was shaky walking up the ramp at the end of my swim, and a race official took my arm for a moment and turned me in the right direction. I followed the marked walkway to the women's changing tent and found my bag. Andy and I had agreed to do a few minutes of yoga stretching between each event, which I did after changing into my bike clothes and shoes, and then I ran out to my bike. Andy's bike was still there, and I realized I had swum faster than him, which we had expected since I was faster in training. I got on my bike and felt fabulous as I rode through Kona and out to the highway. It wasn't until the Kona airport that Andy caught up and came alongside me. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I'm good," I replied. "Remember," he said, "breathe, relax, and concentrate." This was the mantra we had learned in a pre-race bike clinic from the famous bicycle racer, John Howard. "See you later," Andy said as he moved ahead with his faster bike pace. I carried on and felt great. Every so often there were aid stations for us where we could exchange our empty water bottles for full ones and grab a banana. When I passed Puako, I smiled to myself at the joke Andy and I had. If we got too tired, we could just take that turn off and go home, we had teased. Ironically, it was only a few miles away from that point that turned out to be the end of my race. Hilo Hospital, 1982. I opened my eyes and took a deep breath. I was in a bed and saw a door with ICU printed on it. I was alone in an unfamiliar room and wasn't afraid but felt blank. I saw a clipboard on the table next to me and picked it up. I recognized my name on it and started to read when a nurse came in and took it from me. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. "Where am I?" "Can you tell me your name?" she asked, and I could. "What year is it?" 1980, I answered. It was 1982. "Do you know what state you're in?" "I'm in California," I answered. A doctor came in. "I'm Dr. Turner, Michelle. You had an accident, but you're going to be all right." Suddenly, I remembered the triathlon. "When is the Ironman?" I asked urgently. "It was yesterday," he replied gently. "Was I in it?" I scrambled to try to understand. "Yes," he said, "you were in it." Pieces of my experience came back slowly until I remembered Andy and Bobby and then I felt an urgency to talk with them, and I used the hospital phone. Andy told me that I had crashed on my bike near Kauai, and miraculously, Bobby was there. He told me I was in the Hilo hospital, and Bobby had ridden with me in the 3 ambulances it took to get me there. Andy said he finished the race in 13 hours, 13 minutes, and 12 seconds. Bobby was at the finish line to tell him about my crash. Dr. Turner told me I could go home. I had a severe concussion, but he had studied my x-rays and watched me all night, and now that I was awake, he was certain I'd be okay over time. Most of my memories would return. I had a gash in my head that he had stitched up, and he would check me again when I returned to get those stitches removed. "I'm starving," I told Andy on the phone. "Don't come get me without bringing food." He and Bobby arrived with food from Rainbow Mountain, our favorite natural food store in Waimea. We drove home, and I ate. My recovery took a long time.